Hello and welcome to video number 5 in our Introduction to Azure Synapse Analytics series. That's a mouthful. In our previous video, we took a look at Azure Data Lake. And so in this video, I want to extend on that a little bit, and I want to talk about SQL On-Demand. One of the easiest and best ways to access that data once it's in our data lake, especially if we just want to do some real quick analysis or maybe some ad hoc, just accessing of that data. So that's what we're going to talk about here. Now, I'm going to keep the PowerPoint very short in this section. We're going to get right into the demo. But first of all, when we're talking about SQL pools inside of Azure Synapse Analytics, there's the dedicated pool. That is a pool that you provision, that you set up, you add libraries and packages to it, and you pay for it for every minute that it's running. But we also have the capability of using something known as a Serverless SQL Pool. And the Serverless SQL Pool also gives us that capability to handle and deal with big data at scale. But it gives us a ton of flexibility. Right now, I'm going to get into dedicated pools later in this series, and we're going to dive into that, and we're going to talk about the architecture there, how we use it to work with massive parallel processing, right? Large amounts of data, and how that works and how to make it cost effective. But for this video, we're going to focus on serverless, so we're going to kind of dive right into that. When we're talking about the dedicated SQL pools, we really use this for historical data for analytical purposes, right? So these dedicated pools are designed specifically for really reporting purposes, large aggregate queries. We're not using this for our transactional system that is supporting our day-to-day operation. We're using this to support our reports, our dashboards, our machine learning models, where we're accessing a lot of data, big data, and we're running large queries against that data. All right, so it's not designed for those transactional systems. Likewise, the serverless pool is very similar in that way. We're going to be using this architecture, if you will, to query data that's living in our data lake, to pull back results so that we can see those results right there. Now, a lot of times your data analysts are going to be using this so that they can just kind of take a look at the data and get a quick glance at it and do some analysis and do some ad hoc queries. But a lot of users are now leveraging this capability within tools like Power BI and even within pipelines and data flows, which we'll get to all of that as well in this series. But they're using SQL Serverless On-Demand within those technologies in order to get the benefit of that kind of big data processing power at scale. But what do we get with serverless? Why wouldn't I just go with a dedicated pool, right? Well, one, you only get paid for what you use. So you get charged per query that you run. You're not getting charged because some dedicated resource has been provisioned and somebody left it on for 3 days and nobody used it for any purpose, but you still get billed for it. No, this is you only get charged for what you use, right? So if I run a query, however much data is processed in that query, I get charged for that, which a lot of times is literally pennies on the dollar. It's very, very cost effective for most companies. So you get the convenience, you get the reduced cost, you get the flexibility of not having to worry about turning on your dedicated resource and turning it off. It's always there. It's always ready to go. That's the benefit of serverless. And here's the deal. You see serverless compute available in a lot of different areas in Azure, right? It's not just here. We got serverless databases. We got serverless Azure functions. There's a lot of different places where, so actually Spark pools, we'll get to that later in the series. They're serverless. They're not a dedicated resource that you create and pause and turn on. They're more or less serverless that you can turn off as soon as you get done. But this gives you that ad hoc capability. This gives you just-in-time analytics. Now, I'm going to see you back over in our Synapse workspace where we can take a quick look at what is SQL On-Demand and how can we leverage it inside of ASA. I'll see you there. So remember, in order to get to your ASA workspace, an easy way to get there is to go to web.azuresynapse.net, as you see that I've typed right here. And I'm going to go ahead and enter. And that's going to go ahead and launch that Synapse Analytics location for me, that web page. And what I'm going to do there is, of course, go ahead and put in, first of all, my Azure Active Directory that I'm using for this. I'll choose my subscription. And then from the bottom here, I'm going to choose the workspace that we're using in this class, which is going to be this one, I hope. I don't actually remember. Hopefully it's that one. And then I'm going to press continue. And when I press continue, it's going to take me into that ASA workspace right here. Now over here on the left, and then I'll look at that right there, under data, remember under data, when we took our tour earlier, under data is where we can come in here to see our databases, our dedicated pools. This is where we can come in here to see our data lake that is attached and all the files that are also inside of that data lake, right? We can interact with our data lake from right here inside of ASA. That integration capability is one of the really cool features. And as we progress through this series, we'll keep highlighting on these integration capabilities that exist that make our lives a lot easier when we're working within that data platform space, right? So I'm going to go ahead and open up, if you will, that data lake right there, go into that training container, and then I'm going to go, and let me just zoom in right here. So I'm going and expanding right here, expanding. If you've been following along with this series, you should have something that looks very similar to what I have here. And then I'm going to go into my training data folder. Now, in there, remember, we uploaded a holiday.snappy.parquet file. It's right there. I can right click on it and I can do some stuff with it. Take a look at this. If I right click, I can do a new SQL script. I can also create a new notebook. I can create a new data flow. I can create a new integration data set. All of these are topics we're going to talk about in this series. However, for now, I want to go ahead and just do select top 100 rows. So we're going to run a query against this data. This is the game-changing, really, in my opinion, kind of feature functionality that we get with Serverless On-Demand. It's game-changing because it gives us the ability to just query files very easily with minimal work, right? You just right-click and query it. And once again, this is a small file. It's not a lot of data. So what happens here is I right-click and I say top 100. Now, if you know SQL, this is a SQL query. It's just an SQL query. The only thing that's really different here is we're using open row set instead of specifying an exact table, which makes sense because we're not actually querying a database that has tables. We're querying a file that's actually inside of our data lake, right? And so I'm saying select top 100 star from. Now, I'm not really going to change anything here. I'm going to point, whenever you're using Serverless SQL On-Demand, you use the master database. We're going to use the built-in pool. That is your serverless pool. Every ASA environment has a built-in pool, whether you use it or not. If you use it, there's a cost associated with it. If you do not, there's no cost. So just keep that in mind. Now, if I come over here to the right and I click run, assuming that everything is set up correctly, this is going to run and return the results. And of course, the results are going to be exactly what we asked for earlier, which is going to be the top 100 rows of data. Now, we can change that, we can modify that, we can customize that, we can write the SQL query to be, quite frankly, whatever we want, right? And that's the cool thing about the SQL On-Demand. I can come up here and I can say, let's just do a count star, and I return the total number of rows. And I can do return maybe something like, whoops, trying to go down to the next line, maybe something like the max. And then I think the column that I wanted was date. Can't remember because I accidentally hit enter earlier. But if I were to do that, and if it runs here, we'll see. But you can run, there you go. So I have 200 inside of this one right here, 275 total rows. And then I also have a maximum date of July 1st, 2021. So you can run just basic SQL queries here. Unfortunately, my mouse is messing up a little bit. I think I dropped it and broke it earlier, so I got to fix that later on. But you get the idea. You can do group bys, you can do aggregations, you can do row numbers, you can do a lot of different things. Now, there are some intricacies here. For example, if I were to run a query against a CSV file instead of against a Parquet file, I might need to add in some options in here. So I think one of the options here would be something like header row. So if I'm using a CSV file, let me just show you this. I'm going to close out that SQL script. I don't need that. Let me see. We also, earlier in our last video, we uploaded some CSV files, right? We got some internet sales here. So I'm going to right click on one of those and do SQL script again, and we'll do top 100 rows. And then we'll go ahead and execute this, right? Now, there it is. That's exactly what I expected with a CSV file. You'll notice that my column headers are not exactly what I would expect. My column headers are giving me kind of like C1, C2, C3, C4. That's not exactly what I would expect. And so what I need to do is actually pass in one of the optional open row set commands that tells the query that, hey, the first row is actually the headers, right? Parquet files are schema rich. They pick that up automatically. CSV files, not so much. So I come in here and I say, hey, header row, right, equals, you type in true, we run that again. The one thing that I will point out as you're kind of working with this is that if you do Shift Enter, it'll run that script. Be careful running F5 because when you run F5 in a browser, there's a potential that you could refresh the browser and lose all your work. So do not go running F5 inside of the ASA workspace. Hopefully I've told you that in a previous video as well. All right, here we go. So guess what? Now we got our column headers right here across the top. And so that's just one of those optional things. You can look up the Microsoft documentation, take a look at the open row set command and see all of those different options that are available. But this is SQL On-Demand. Now we can take this code that you just saw right here. We can take it, we can put it in Connect using Power BI. We can take it, we can connect and use it inside of a source, inside of a pipeline or a data flow, and we can get that massive kind of parallel processing capability, that big data architecture to read a lot of data from our data lake at scale. Now, if you know from a previous video, or hopefully I've talked about this before, but ideally you would be working with Parquet files. Parquet files give us better performance, better compression. So ideally, we're not going to be working with a lot of CSV files, especially if you're using a lot of SQL On-Demand. But that is a conversation for another day. As always, thank you for joining us. If you like this video, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. And also, take a look at our training courses at Pragmatic Works. That's how we get money. That's how we get paid. And we would love to have you as one of our students learning and growing your career. All right, I'll see you in the next video.